Being a partisan was in many ways worse and more challenging than being a regular soldier, starting with the fact that any connection with the partisans or helping them was punishable by death, not just for you, but for your entire family, and that, in the event of capture, you were not protected by any rights and were often subjected to brutal interrogations to reveal your comrades. If that wasn't enough, you were mostly equipped with whatever you could find, usually captured enemy weapons or hunting rifles, and there was always a shortage of ammunition and war supplies. However, despite all these challenges, the partisans in World War II put up relentless resistance to the occupiers of their countries and carried out some brilliant, thrilling, and incredibly brave actions, which we will talk about today. First, their fight was extremely complicated and demanding, and even after successful operations, they knew that their actions would immediately provoke retaliation against the local population. For example, in Yugoslavia, the Germans had a directive that for every German soldier killed by the partisans, they would execute 100 civilians, and for every wounded soldier, 50 civilians would be shot. This was carried out in several massacres in Yugoslavia, such as in Guerilla War, where around 2,500 civilians were executed as a result of a partisan action, and many of those killed were children taken from school. All of this placed immense pressure on their minds, knowing that even when they inflicted damage on the enemy, it was the people who would suffer. The partisan movement arose mostly spontaneously when people became extremely dissatisfied with the treatment by the occupying forces. The remnants of broken armies of occupied countries, as well as ordinary men and women, organized themselves into small groups to cause trouble for the occupiers. They started a relentless and brutal guerrilla war, with the partisans of Russia, Yugoslavia, Italy, and France being the most famous for their actions and effectiveness, but also those in many other countries. On the Eastern Front, when the German army rapidly advanced deep into the Soviet territory, it created space for the partisans to hide in the forests behind enemy lines and disrupt the enemy in every possible way. Their main method, besides setting up ambushes, was disrupting the railways and supply lines of the German army. However, this was by no means an easy or simple task, as the Germans vigorously guarded the railways. The entire length of the railways was fortified, with bunkers, patrols, and even the forest near the tracks were cleared to prevent anyone from approaching unnoticed. The trains were armored, equipped with 20mm anti-aircraft guns, and guarded by soldiers. Soviet partisans used various tactics to destroy the railways and trains, from placing mines to dismantling the tracks. They would tie long wires to the rails and, at the last moment before the train arrived, pull the wires from their cover to move the tracks and derail the train. They would then use the moment to quickly attack and overpower the guards, take everything that could be useful, and inflict as much damage as possible before retreating swiftly into the forests and their hideouts. The Germans tried to encircle and completely destroy the areas where the partisans were operating. This was often extremely risky for the partisans, but they had an exceptionally well-developed network of spies and scouts on whom they relied. When they were warned that a large enemy force was approaching, they would quickly pack up and leave the area during the night. This infuriated the occupying forces, who felt like they were fighting ghosts. So various tactics were used to counter them, and as mentioned earlier, these mainly involved innocent civilians. The Luftwaffe would shoot at livestock grazing in the fields to provoke a response from the partisans, and similar dark tactics were implemented with little regard for civilians. If someone was caught aiding partisans by providing food, shelter, information, or other forms of assistance, they were often shot on the spot without any form of trial, and this could also include their whole family. One of the terrifying measures was public hanging, where a captured partisan would be executed in the town square and his body left for a couple of days as a warning. The entire town would be forced to gather and watch this brutal spectacle. However, this often only further enraged the local population and added new volunteers to the partisans. One of the most striking examples is the public execution of the partisan Stjepan Filipović in Yugoslavia. Stjepan had participated in numerous actions against the occupiers until he was eventually captured. After several days of brutal interrogation by the Gestapo, he didn't reveal anything and was sentenced to death. However, Stepan decided to resist even in his death. On the day of his execution, he was brought to the town square in front of a crowd of people, and he kept giving a speech and shouting for the people to rise and fight against the occupiers, saying that death was nothing to fear, but that life in slavery was worse. His speech so infuriated the Germans that his execution was carried out earlier than scheduled, and until the last second before German officer kicked a stool, Stepan was shouting, "Death to fascism, freedom to the people," with both hands raised in defiance. The image of his execution, which was supposed to frighten the people, became a symbol of the fight against the occupiers. There is also the tragic story of Lepa Radic, also from Yugoslavia, a 17-year-old girl who met the same fate as Stepan. At the last moment before her hanging, she was asked to reveal her commander in exchange for her life, to which she coldly responded, "My comrades will reveal themselves when they come to kill criminals like you, to the last one. I don't know about you, but these stories give me chills. It is unimaginable how brave these young people were." The Allied forces recognized that the partisans could be a formidable force and often supported them with weapons and equipment. The most common method was via airdrops under the cover of night, coordinated with the partisans to receive these drops effectively. But most of the equipment the partisans captured from their enemies, taking weapons from the killed, or attacking and looting well-guarded depots. The Allies sometimes supported the partisans with coordinated airstrikes and air support to assist their operations. The partisans soon evolved from scattered bands into a well-organized army, such as Tito's partisans in Yugoslavia, who, with Allied support, liberated their country from the Germans on their own. However, during the war, their job was far from the interesting and heroic way we romanticize it today. Being a partisan was incredibly dangerous, and they undertook far more risks than soldiers in conventional warfare. They were constantly hunted by the best Axis units, such as the SS and the Gestapo, and the local population could be either their ally or their enemy. Many collaborators with the occupiers effectively worked as spies for them, revealing the identities and plans of the partisans. The threat of betrayal was constantly hanging over them, and if you were wounded in combat, good luck with your recovery, because now no one could know that you were wounded, so you could not seek help so easily, and partisan hospitals had to be hidden far from the eyes of the enemy. Hospitals were hidden deep within forests, caves, or mountains, and wounded partisans were often blindfolded and carried to the secret location, which only a few people knew, to prevent treason. The wounded, blindfolded partisan would be carried on a stretcher and often turned around, left or right, so that they could not gain a sense of direction and, if captured and interrogated, reveal the hospital's location. This would mean the end for all the wounded partisans, as happened several times when the Axis powers discovered or caught up with the evacuation of the wounded, leading to the execution of all partisans and medical workers found. Medical supplies were scarce, and basic first aid kits, makeshift bandages, and rudimentary surgical tools were mostly everything they had. Even essential supplies like antiseptics, painkillers, and antibiotics were often in short supply. One interesting example is the Franja Partisan Hospital in Slovenia. Franja Hospital was built in an almost inaccessible gorge surrounded by steep cliffs and dense forests. The location was chosen for its natural protection, making it nearly impossible for enemy forces to find or attack. The hospital complex was ingeniously constructed with a series of wooden huts connected by narrow paths and bridges. The huts were well camouflaged, so the Luftwaffe could not spot them, and they had some truly ingenious methods to stay hidden. Franja Hospital treated over 500 wounded partisans and civilians from various nationalities, including Allied pilots who had been shot down. Despite its remote location, the hospital was equipped with an operating room, X-ray equipment, and a small workshop where prosthetics and other medical devices were made. Supplies and wounded patients were brought in under the cover of night, and strict security measures were in place to prevent any leaks of information. You can even visit Franja Hospital today in Slovenia. It is preserved as a museum and memorial for their sacrifice. Also, keep in mind that a lot of partisan fighters were just kids, with some joining at just 15 years old. Some of these children became famous national heroes during the war, but their stories are often sad and their lives ended tragically early. Boys and girls helped the partisan effort in various ways, as nurses, couriers, spies, procuring food, and even in direct combat. Boys as young as 16 years old were exceptional bombers. They would sneak unnoticed into enemy fortifications and throw bombs, giving the main group of partisans a chance to use the chaos to attack the enemy. All in all, these people endured the unbearable, living for years in forests and mountains in an unfair fight with a far stronger enemy, risking their lives for the freedom of their people and their country.